Hello, I have a very special guest today who is going to help me with, we're going to go through my family quilts, and she is going to tell us more about them. And I'm really excited to have Jo here. Tell them who you are.
I'm Jo Glass, and my Ravelry name is Quilt and Knit Nut. And you can tell because I love old quilts and I love to knit, so I'm kind of a nut.
And she's here for the Eagle Crest retreat, and she came 2 days early, which is really exciting. So we're going to share these family quilts with you, and I know I'm going to learn a lot.
Well, I'm not an expert, but I have made sort of a study about it. So
you've been collecting quilts?
For, I guess the first quilt that I collected was probably in 1975. And I made a rule for myself that I would buy every quilt that I ever saw that cost less than $40, every vintage quilt. Well, I have about 100 and...
Yeah, we won't say how many, but
okay,
her house is like a quilt museum.
Right.
So, because I've been there. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So that's, oh yeah, and I'm Prairie Piper on Ravelry, and on Instagram I'm Knitting Pipeline, and this is obviously the Knitting Pipeline YouTube channel. So, okay.
Okay. There are a couple of books that I use as a reference, and I think they're fabulous. This is the Encyclopedia of Pieced Quilt Patterns. There's also an Encyclopedia of Applique Patterns, and the author of this is Barbara Brackman. Now, she's a person that I really have admired. She was in graduate school at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and in her home ec department, they had boxes of quilt patterns. And so she's poking around one day, and she saw these, and she says, "Oh, I'm going to make a quilt out of every one of these patterns." Well, that wasn't possible. But anyway, this book has 4,000 different patterns in it. And so it's really helpful to, if you've got something you don't know what it is, then you can look, and she has it described about how to determine. And many quilts had a lot of different names for them too. And then, so this book is called Dating Fabrics, and it's by Eileen Junkie Trestain. And it has lots of good information about the different appearances of different quilts from different fabrics from different eras.
Oh,
and so
exciting.
we'll talk about that. Yeah. Okay.
And we'll put the names of those books down in the notes, and also on the Knitting Pipeline blog. Okay, what should we start with?
I think that we probably can start with this.
We're kind of going more or less oldest to newer ones.
This was probably one of the things about quilts is that you kind of have to judge the age by the youngest fabric that's in the quilt top. Because, you know, like a lot of us have older scraps or older yarn, and then they have a new one come out. And so that's something to think about. But so this is fabrics from the 1830s to the 1860s.
That goes along. My grandmother actually wrote tags on these, and this one says, I think Jenny Anderson was 12 years old when she made this. And she was born, I think I told you, I'm going to go get my record book. So I think 1860s she was born. 66, I think I said.
So that we would kind of assume that this, however young the youngest fabric is, would be, it would be quilted after that. This has got fabrics that are very similar in the palette to these in here. They call those double pinks, and that's a great way to help judge the age. Another thing, and Paula and I have talked about this, she is very, very lucky to have these handwritten notes that her grandmother made for her. And that's a great thing. But what I recommend too is to take some muslin and use a Pigma pen, and to write the information down. And in this case, because we wouldn't want to lose her grandmother's handwriting, you could photocopy that, print it on the muslin, and then give other genealogical information. This was my grandmother who lived in central Illinois. She was born this date to this date. You might put her maiden name in there, and the county where she lived, so that you have family information that people could do a genealogical search based on this information. And then just tack it on the back of the quilt, just with a very easy running stitch, so that in case these ever get separated, if the pin ever rusts, any of that, you'd have stuff so that, the people who come after us, we're just stewards, And the people who come after us will have an appreciation for the makers and the women who made these.
Now, as you've held this up, I can see through.
Right.
And I can see through that where the most worn
Right.
places are.
And one
On the
reason
other
of
side.
that is because how it's folded. You know, it's probably folded in quarters, and so this goes this way and that goes this way. So it's a good idea sometimes to roll your quilts every once in a while just for a different kind of a thing.
This is 9 patch, right?
Yes.
These are 9 patches.
And there's not a lot of contrast in with these, even though they are different fabrics. But this is interesting. Green fabric or green dye was what they called fugitive. It didn't really stick and stay green. They overdyed a blue with a yellow. And so as it washed over time, then kind of you got a little more funny combination of things. And so that's another way that you can help. I can't remember the date that the stable green dye came, but you have that problem with, a lot of things.
Yeah. So we'll hold it up so you can see.
Okay.
It's not very big. Looks like a baby size. But she was 12 years old when she made it.
Oh, yeah.
It is on point too.
Oh yeah, it's beautiful, yeah.
9 patches are on point. Okay.
All right.
Number 1 quilt. And then I
Number one
think we're
quilt.
going to get
Okay.
that one next. Or this one. Maybe this one.
Okay.
You're the boss.
This one's going to be kind of hard to see because it was a 2-color, and you sort of can see the shadow almost of where the pink was. So there's a central diamond on point, and then there's a little sashing and then corner points. And that probably was also in that same time period, about 1860 to 1870, is what my guess would be. And this might have been a good sampler for a young woman learning how to quilt, because it would be a project that they could do and hand quilt, but still be done.
And the quilting on the back is not the simplest. It is a feather. I mean, it's. Where did I? These are photos
Yeah,
from
so,
that. Yes,
right.
it's some
Just
feathering.
feathering,
and
yeah.
so
And some stuff in the, so this would have been an excellent piece for somebody to practice and learn on.
this actually came from my other great grandmother's side of the family, the German side. Her name was Augusta Finger. And then the one that we just previously showed was from the other great grandmother, Jenny Anderson.
I thought that this,
That's for my family's information.
oh yeah,
Okay,
and I've got an Aunt Augusta too, or I had one, so I think that's hilarious.
I love that name.
So I really thought this was a very, very interesting quilt, and you can tell that it looks a lot different in tone and everything from the prior ones. And what I thought was so exciting about this is it has a lot of this very dark fabric, black fabrics. Today people are still enamored of the British monarchy, and the same thing was true in the 1800s. And Prince Albert, the consort of Queen Victoria, died in 1861. And so she was super crazy about everything being in mourning. She insisted that all the doors in London, front doors, be painted black in mourning for him. And so these fabrics here are called mourning fabrics, mourning blacks, because in those days they had a very strict etiquette about when you wore full mourning when somebody died and the degree of closeness of the person, and then when you passed through that to gray and then to violet and those things. So
Let's hold it up a little bit higher. This is pretty good. This is the biggest one this is the biggest one that we have so far.
yeah. So
It actually is showing up a little lighter on the camera, if you can see that, Joe,
Yeah.
than it is. And here's the piece of paper that my grandmother wrote on here that says that made by Jane Anderson when she was a little girl. And this is a simple 4-patch alternated with squares.
And some of these probably are homespun or other natural kind of, made on the homestead or made at home fabrics.
The backing too looks
Yes.
like a homespun. And the quilting is very simple on this. It's just diagonal lines.
Yeah. And one thing that we wanted to talk about is, you see how some of these, and I don't want to put my finger through there, but the fabric is shattered.
We could move up to the camera a little bit and show that. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so then you can kind of see that. And one reason that happens in these dark fabrics is that they were dyed with metallic dyes. This also happens in silk. And so the things that weight the silk and make it rustly are the same things that will rust over time and then shatter and wear in that kind of spectacular fashion.
And this is truly a scrappy quilt. I mean, there's everything in here from pink to purple. Who knows what the original color was? And then some of these almost look like a men's jacket pattern or fabric, and blues and oranges. So it does have quite a scrappy look to it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move that one back over here.
All right.
And then I think that, I think this one is.
We did that one, I think.
We did that one. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
Okay, that's right. And so.
This is probably the most special one that I have.
So moving over in roughly chronological order, this is a crazy quilt. And the family information says 1871.
Is that,
I think?
no, 1890.
1890, maybe 1870, okay, whoever.
1890.
Okay, and this is a fabulous quilt, and you can talk about the family, the aspect of it being.
Right. My great-grandmother, before she was married, this is a friendship quilt. So her friends, and it was in the town of Marissa, Illinois, her friends made blocks for the quilt. And I don't know, so you can see here, Joe, there's Edna.
Ella.
And some initials, and then some of them embroidered, like there's a donkey and a fish and some fancy embroidery work on some of these, and then it's put together. And then the interesting thing, and I don't know if I can find it right now, but my great-grandfather actually made a block for this too, and they were not married at the time.
Was he Rob?
No, he was Henry Finger.
Oh, it's right here. I got
Right there?
Henry Finger over here.
Okay, yeah, Henry Finger, and he's on that.
We can pull that out.
Yeah, you can pull that up. So for me, this is probably the most valuable quilt because of all the stitching, and I don't know if that will come out backwards on the, I guess it will.
Well,
It's, anyway, you guys can tell. And the quilting is actually, it's tied off, the whole, and look at the binding, has a feathering, what's it called, firm stitch, I think. So that's called firm stitch, and there's so many embroidery stitches on this.
Quilts of this kind generally didn't have batting because they were so heavy because of the different fabrics, the velvets and all that. And again, this was, I think the date on it is 1890, did you say? And again, this was a thing that was similar. This was kind of a crazy quilt craze in the 1890s. People would swap. They would have these block swaps.
And this is really big. This is, well, it's not, by today's standards, maybe not, but it's a good, I've not measured it, but it's a really big quilt. And then there's some of the silks that have deteriorated.
Yeah, you see some of that same shattering in these. A lot of times these were used for display instead of for beds. They might have it hanging off a sofa in the parlor or on the piano if there was one, or that kind of a thing.
Look at this fabric, Joe. It looks almost like some kind of upholstery fabric. It's like a nubby, looped fabric.
Well, and this is chenille. Old chenille, which is a fun thing.
And velvet, there's a lot of velvet, and And then
the satins, and again, the satins, remember in Gone with the Wind when Mammy was talking about she wanted a red satin petticoat that would rustle when she went to heaven, and St. Peter would know her by the rustle of her skirt. The thing that caused that was the weighting and the dyeing process of those silks. So that was kind of fun.
I think that one's next, or this. These are kind of together, I think.
Yeah. And this is a really fun. This probably was.
Let's see if we got it right side up. Yes, we do.
Like 1910, 1900 to 1910. And we'll go up and do a close-up of some of these blocks.
Yeah, so they're right there.
These blocks were called penny squares, and they were sold in a variety of different, different patterns. They had some that were all the presidents. They had some that were nursery rhymes. They had some that were birds, some that were states, and it was a very reasonable thing to be able to purchase and then teach young children to embroider. But this setting is really nice with the cornerstones.
Another couple blocks. We'll move your way.
Okay.
I know, my way. Sorry. Everything's done in reverse, so it's kind of hard to tell. So my grandmother made this quilt when she was about 10 or 12 years old, and she was born in 1898, so.
And the quality of the needlework really is beautiful. Now, again, you have some loss in the middle where it was folded, but that just happens. And some of these things, like the pigs, look sort of ferocious. You think, oh, well, this is...
Children's books were ferocious back then, too. Now, this is Tom and Dolly, so that might be a character from a storybook. Mm-hmm. And so all the blocks are embroidered and sashed. And I love this. Little corner, what do you call those?
Cornerstones.
Cornerstones.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Well, I guess we'll put this back on the sofa here. And then we have this little doll quilt, and then...
Okay.
Yeah. You know the order.
Yeah. All right. So now we're getting into the 1920s and 1930s and beyond. And so we have a couple. This, I think the pattern is called Boston Commons. I'll bring it up close. It's a doll quilt. And this is exquisite. Each of these little blocks are about 1/2 inch in size, finished. So you can see, using my finger for scale, they're just tiny. And the quilting is beautiful. And again, this is a good example of that fugitive green. So they probably used an older piece of green from their fabric basket with the newer blocks. And on that quilt and this one that we're about to talk about, many of the blocks, the applique blocks or those squares, are made from feed sacks. Now, I brought an original feed sack. This was probably maybe a 10-pound size. And there are a couple of things that are interesting that you can't really tell from this, but they feel different. The weave is very thick and coarse feeling. Now, if it was chicken feed, it was coarse. If it was salt or flour, it was a much finer weave because the bag had to hold the contents. And that would be a problem. But you can also tell they're stitched with almost like not really a serger, but a chain stitch. And so if you were to pull this out, you pull one thing and it zips right out. And so if you see yard goods of a certain width or dimension with little holes in them, that's what it was, because that's what they used for. My husband says he remembers very well his grandmother telling her husband, when you go down and get chicken feed, here's a piece, see if you can get something that'll match this.
So it was flour and sugar and...
Flour and sugar and feed of different kinds, chicken feed and other, not things so much as horse grain and things like that, but they even had pig feed, but some of those bigger feed didn't come in decorative, they just were plain. But still, that was useful because then you could bleach out the back and then you could use it for backing quilts.
One of the best marketing ploys of all time.
Oh yes, it really was. It really was.
Yeah, like people are using this fabric from the feed sack, so why don't we make some pretty fabric for the feed sacks, and then more people want to buy our
sacks instead of somebody else. And they also had patterns that were made specifically for using fabric from feed sacks. I saw a suit pattern one time, a woman's suit, and they have, all kinds of different things that were like that. So this is a beautiful example, another one of Paula's family quilts.
My great-grandmother was an invalid for 11 years. She had a stroke. And so what she did was she made quilt tops, but they were not finished quilts. And my mother, over the years, had some of these done by a hand sewing group at the church. So this is one of the ones my great grandmother made, the top of it and the border, and then the back of it and everything in the back batting were done in the 80s. And it's hand stitched though.
And what's interesting about this border is it's called an ice cream cone border. And especially if you see it, you can see how easily you think, well, gosh, they do sort of look like ice cream cones for that.
And this is it's a pretty good size. It's not really. Is this square or rectangular? I can't quite tell.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Not sure. Yeah, but it's a pretty good size. It doesn't really fit a standard bed, but it probably fit a standard bed at one time. You know, the beds were smaller.
And this is Dresden plate. They have a lot of different varieties of what this would be called. So
while you're folding that up, I'll go get the embroidered one.
All right. And even on this quilt, some of the fabrics around the border have started to deteriorate. And one reason for that was, of course, it's up by your face and you're grabbing it with your hands and pulling it up, and the oil from your hands, even if you're a clean person, you know, they do have an impact. And I actually have a piece of, I don't know what you call it. It's what they call a beard guard, and it goes along the top of the quilt, and you could tack it on. And then, you know, if your husband had a grubby beard, mine does not, it is clean, I promise, then you could take that piece off, wash it, and then do the rest. So that's kind of interesting.
So this is another one that my great grandmother made when she was an invalid. And it's every square is the same. I don't know how anybody could continue to make all these embroidered. Can they see that? I must pull that forward. Yeah, there they are. All the squares are the same. But then the quilting was done probably in the 80s or so. There's no I don't know, Joe, maybe you can.
There is a little batting.
A little batting.
It's a thin.
Very thin batting.
Yeah.
Which, the 80s batting was puffier in general, I think. Don't you think?
Yeah, they had different kinds. They certainly did have that.
Well, they made a good choice on this one then.
Yeah, they had that super puffy.
So this is probably the biggest. It's bigger than that last one. This fits a full-size bed because we have had it on the bed in there.
And a lot of times these patterns were published in different magazines, like the different farming magazines, and they'd have a pattern, or even in the newspapers they would serialize if it was a bunch. So, but you could easily see the farming magazine or the rural magazine came in, and Grandma said, gosh, this would be a fabulous pattern, and that's what she did, and she only needed that one thing. She could either buy the send off for a nickel for the blocks, or she could just do it freehand.
So there's those two more modern ones there, and they're not really antique, but
they're family stuff.
Yeah, they're family stuff. So I want to go ahead and put them in.
Yeah.
My mother made this for our firstborn son. We have three boys, and after Joe looked at it, I mean, it's kind of obvious that this center, at least, was a block she might have found somewhere at a sale or whatever, and then maybe even...
She might have even found it in her grandmother's work basket.
Possibly.
Yeah, because you can see this fabric feels different, and it sort of has a different tone and a different whatever. But this is, I think, a real artistic setting, which I really haven't seen before, of the bars and the corners.
And this could have maybe been a top. My mother does not remember making this, but I know she gave it to us. And it's been tied. Yeah. So it's not stitched with thread. It just is tied with like a yarn or something. But that was well used for that son. And then my sister made this one.
I'm not sure what that is.
This is just funny. This is... You know how babies will, this is just was a receiving blank, but you know how babies will latch on to, so I just, it's one of those.
Loved to death, I think.
Yeah, I just think it's hilarious.
Oh,
so this was his favorite small blanket, which he called his bati. This was his favorite big blanket, and this is the one my sister made, and it is loved to pieces, basically, but it's a simple...
And this
squares.
Fabric is much more, it's got polyester in it, and you can tell that there are different ways that you can test for polyester, but, and it's really, the polyester holds up very well for a kid's quilt. You can wash it and do whatever.
Because look at the back.
Yeah.
It's probably 100% cotton,
Yes.
and it's worn more
it's
than
kind
the
of
front.
shredded more.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, okay, now there's some quilts downstairs, one of which I forgot to bring up here.
I think, can I do Dan's one
Yes,
now?
you
Okay.
go ahead and I'll go get the other ones. Yes.
All right.
Can you do that on your own?
I think so.
Okay.
Especially because you can edit. My family doesn't have a quilting tradition. My mother was English, but luckily I married into somebody, married into a family that did have a tradition. And this was pieced by my husband's mother. And I think it's interesting for a couple of reasons. She did this in about 1951, 1952. And what she used was, it's kind of hard to tell, this is called a string piece or foundation piece. And as a foundation, she used Sears catalog. And so it's hilarious. There are some ads in here that say, oh, being nice to your mailman, don't make him carry a bunch of heavy stuff in December. Get it early to be easy, and get your presents early to be mailed so the mailman doesn't have to be so sad. And you're like, really, that's just Sears saying, hey, hurry up and buy your stuff early from us.
That's so funny.
And so there were some interesting things on the back. But she pieced this. Dan was born in 1948, and his biological father sadly was a moonshiner and was run out of Noonan or went to California to evade the rival moonshine gangs. And so the house that he was born in didn't have indoor plumbing. And so he was telling me when I was talking to him about this, yeah, you're pretty lucky that, or mom was lucky that the Sears catalog didn't end up in the outhouse, because that's really what we used. That may be not too nice to say, but so I think about her, with a small baby, and he had polio when he was between 1 and 2, he had polio in his neck. But she moved back into the bosom of her family, her family home. She had a couple of sisters who were still there, and so they were there to help with Dan being sick and all that. But when I pulled this quilt top out, his aunts would say, oh, that's the dress Mama made me in 2nd grade. That's the this, that's the that. And the other thing I thought was kind of interesting about this is you can tell that this fabric looks a lot different than all these quilts would look, because it's much more recent. But there were these crazy things they call conversation fabrics, conversation prints. And it's cartoons. And I was actually able to look up the cartoon characters' names and find out that this was an artist who started in the 1930s and went through to the 1950s. And so it's sort of like, Disney fabrics or other things that are popular now. So, but you just had whatever was in the scrap basket, and that's what she did. But don't plan to finish this because, the Sears catalog is its own part of the story. And
It's not like you need any more quilts either.
no, that's right. And the Sears catalog is also on part of the story on Paula's floor now. So.
Okay, now this one I'm springing on you.
Okay.
You haven't, all these you haven't
Yeah, I
seen.
had 5 minutes to look at the other ones.
Yeah, she definitely gathered enough information. This is one that actually I'm not sure. I think it's possible it's a family quilt. This is why you need to record these things, because it's quite possible I purchased this somewhere. It hasn't been finished in recent century.
No, it's old.
It's old. The
right.
whole thing is old. It's in perfect condition, and I believe this is a double wedding ring.
It is.
Okay, let's hold it up. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. And this is also made of feed sack blocks of fabrics.
This would fit a full-size bed. It has been on our bed before, but I don't know the origin of it. It's one of those that's questionable, but I know it was completely finished when it was done, and that's that double wedding ring. Okay.
And the binding is also feed sack, and the binding is contemporary with the blocks, you might say. Okay.
All right. And now I know the rest of these are all not family quilts, but I want to include them anyway and see what Joe has to say about them. So my buttons are clattering on the chair. Well, if I move the chair, it'll just clatter on the table. So on one of the episodes of the audio knitting pipeline audio podcast, I talked about this, I think, or maybe Gail and I talked about it too. So this is a quilt I picked up for, I don't know, $10 or $20 at a yard sale. And I've had it for a good 20 to 25 years. And you know how we all are so picky sometimes about our work, if you're a quilter or a knitter or crafter of any kind. And when my sister and I were photographing the quilts, I suddenly noticed, and I think it's over on your end, there's a whole row where the blocks are smaller, the pinwheels are smaller. So for whatever reason, is that on your side or my side? No, wait a minute.
This one's smaller.
No, it's the whole row. Wait a minute.
Oh, it's the bottom row.
It's the bottom row? I can't see.
Yeah, I think it's the bottom row because...
No, yeah, that one, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can see here that the pinwheels, I don't know how well it shows up, but these pinwheels on this bottom row, and the fabric is faded differently, but these are smaller, and it doesn't line up.
Right.
And for whatever reason, they didn't have enough fabric, and this is what I think of now when I'm so critical of my own work, and I'll think, oh, yeah, that quilting could have been better, that knitting could have been better. But then I think about this quilt that I had it for probably 25 years and never noticed that this one row was different.
So let's pull it up to the camera and I'll show you a couple of things about it. This fabric is called double pink. So it's got a pink background and another darker pink. So that's called double pink. These are all indigos, and the indigos are 1880 to 1910 probably. And then you had a few of these Mourning prints, for some other scraps that were left in the back.
The curious thing about this quilt is that it is machine quilted, I think. Joe, look, you can tell.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. Yeah.
But it's pretty. Look at the...
It's gorgeous.
It kind of has the backing, has some beautiful quilting on it. But
it's got like a gorgeous...
kind of
waves.
Waves,
almost. Yeah. And people people say, oh, well, it's machine quilted. It can't be. Yes, it could. People were machine quilting in the 1860s when Isaac Singer came around and they, even with treadle machines. You'd have to be pretty darn good to be able to do it. But certainly it's unusual, but it's not
unheard of.
Not unheard of. That's
okay.
Correct.
So what was the date you figured on this?
I think 1890s, 1880s to 1910, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had no idea on that one because like I said, I don't have my grandmother's little scrap of paper.
Well, now was that what a family one too?
No, we're on non-family ones now.
Okay.
That one questionable one. Now this is probably of the I have two favorites of the non-family quilts, and this is one of them, and I believe it's an Irish chain pattern. And I know I purchased this at auction somewhere or a estate sale of some kind. And I just love this quilt.
Oh yeah, gosh, this is
and it's in perfect condition, really. There's and it's big. It could probably almost make a queen size bed. Definitely a double.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And once again, it's artistically done with solids that give your eye kind of a place to rest. Of course, they may just appear solid now. We don't really know, but so there are patterned ones and probably a yellow or some of them.
And I just noticed this because we were talking about the Dresden plate, that this quilting in the white part looks a lot like a Dresden plate or a flower.
And that also appeared in the very earliest one that we had, that was the very pale pink and white, had that same quilting that you could see from the back.
And then the squares on this are just done, the quilting is just done like
around the edge,
like quarter-inch around.
Yeah, it's not really stitching the ditch, but it's close to that. And there's some beautiful little prints in there, some childhood. You could imagine somebody's PJs being made out of that, and little bunny fabrics.
So what do you think on this one?
I would say probably 1920s to 1940, something. Yeah.
So, all right, I'll just gently lay it over here. We can deal. These have been rolled up. Gail and I did that. So, wait a minute. This one I think is going to be maybe, I don't know.
That one looks older too.
This looks older.
Yeah.
this one is older.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And I don't know about this. I can't remember where I got it.
Oh, but now see, this is fun. And once again, these super bright prints are feed sack. And one of the things about the Depression was so hard for so many people, but the fabrics were cheery. You know, it wasn't those same mourning prints from old Queen Victoria. I mean, there was stuff that was designed to give you a little lift.
I love the bright colors on this and the bright sashing. It's a really gorgeous quilt.
So it's interesting that this is appliqued. It's very similar. The pattern is similar to the Dresden plate that we looked at earlier, but it has pointed instead of round petals. But this one has got an applique over the top to close in where the previous one we looked at didn't have any.
And is this also called a Dresden plate, or does it have another name?
I think they probably have other names, but I brought the wrong book. All right.
You were good to bring 2 books on a flight, in my opinion.
Yeah, Delta was proud of me.
Yeah, I'm sure they were. This is one of my favorites that I ever purchased. I just adore this quilt.
The quilting on this is fabulous.
It is. And I love the colors.
And see, once again, we've got this is an ocean waves pattern is what this is called. And you can see the Mourning prints. We see a little bit of shattering and lots of the indigo. So the fabrics would have been probably 1880 to 1910. And I don't really see anything that looks much much newer than that. And the quilting is fabulous. You can't really tell, but it's
Let's bring it up here so they can see, at least in those white squares, how the quilting is done. If you've been,
it's about a half inch grid. So
there we go.
Yeah. So it's amazing how much handwork is in this. Mm-hmm. So it's beautiful. But then you can see the shattering. You can see the indigos. You can see the Mourning prints.
I just love all the reds and blacks, and that it's. I think it's one of the most beautiful ones I have.
But you can really tell, but the difference between this and the one we just saw, how much more vivid those colors are. And how much, so that's a way that we can tell the age as well. I think that...
look at the binding on this, it's really pretty.
Yeah. And I'm not positive if that binding's been replaced or not. It could be,
it does look a little less worn than it might be. Okay. Now, these 2,
landslide.
That's all right, we'll get it. Didn't knock the camera over. This I picked up for practically nothing. It's a 9 patch. It's super soft and deteriorated, but I got it at a garage sale or something years and years ago because I don't really do too much of that now. But it's in bad shape.
Yeah, the back of it has been
but it's
shattered. But it's yeah. And what's fun about this is this green is called Nile green, and sometimes people call it 30s green. And so that's a very, that kind of dates that fabric at least was purchased or obtained at that time. But you have all kinds of mixed in things. But I would say probably 1930s to 40s. I don't really see anything too much newer in there.
So when a quilt is in this bad a shape on the back, what do you think? I'm content to just keep it the way it is and just not do anything with it, but
I've done a lot of repairs. Well, I don't want people to start sending me their quilts. I had a friend who said, "Oh, don't you know something about quilts? I've got a quilt my grandmother made," and it was, especially along the borders, the edges, was terrible like this. I mean, it was just, and what I ended up doing, but that fabric was more of an Alamance plaid, which is something that was made in North Carolina, so it was much sturdier than this. But what I ended up doing was putting a patch along the back to reinforce the areas, and then put the binding on over both of those things. This is probably too large an area to do that too, but that's...
it feels good.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's fine.
Yeah.
And it's perfect for the kids to play on, and you know.
Right. This may have been the one I put on the floor when they.
For the boys.
Well, not for the boys.
Okay.
When the granddaughters came, I had a play area for them. Actually, I think it might have been this one coming up. because this one
It's a little sturdier.
It's sturdier, and I think this could be, well, I'm going to hear what you have to say about it, but I think is it Courthouse Steps or something? No, Around the World. Trip Around the World. Yeah, and that was very popular in the 70s, I think.
Yeah. But, and what's fun about this, it's a kind of a mixture of quilting. You have some of this fish scale quilting, okay, which are curves. So they're like fish scale, I don't know what you call it, but, and then you've also got square quilting as well. The fish scale is around this border in here and down. And in the South, they had a couple of things. They called it Baptist fan or Methodist fan, and it would be in arcs, pretty large arcs, and they call that, if you're a Baptist, you called it Baptist fan. If you're Methodist, you called it Methodist fan, but you could quilt just using your arm as the guide.
Anyway, I paid $4 for this one. I remember that. It was the most recent one I bought.
Oh, yeah.
And
but that's
can they see it? Hold it up as high as you can so they can kind of see the pattern. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
All right. So now this is the part where Jo is going to talk about how to care for your quilts, especially your antique quilts. And I cannot wait to hear what she has to say, because as you can tell, she's a fountain of knowledge here. That last section, she had not even seen those quilts ahead of time.
It's true.
It's true. Okay, friend.
Okay. We noticed on the quilts we looked at before, there was a lot of damage and deterioration of fabric along certain parts. And so if you have a quilt and it's an old quilt and you always fold it in half and then you fold it in half again, the stress that's going to be on those edges is going to be what helps to cause deterioration in those fabrics. So it's always a great thing to take, and every once in a while, some people do it like every year on the day after Thanksgiving, or some on your birthday, or some day that you take your quilts out, you air them, and you just make sure that there haven't been any mice or anything in there, and then you refold them. Now, sometimes people, if they have enough space, they might roll them, and that is probably the best way to do it, because there's no place that has a lot of stress on it from folding. But everybody can't do that. And even if you did it, next year you'd want to roll it the other way, just with the idea that there was some change in how things were done so that the stresses were distributed differently along the quilt. So I display a lot of quilts. Some of them I've stitched sleeves on the back and put that on a curtain rod or something. And I also use clips sometimes to clip along if I'm going to display it that way. So there are a lot of different, opportunities or different things that you could do for that.
Now, you might have seen me carrying those rolls of quilts. I do try to roll them as best I can, and I have those on one of those wire shelving units in a closet, but those are not the family quilts. The family quilts are in a walnut quilt chest. It's heavy.
The lid was heavy.
The lid was heavy, and I'll get a photo of it and insert it in here. And it has quilt patterns that are like a parquet in wood on the inside of it. And at one time there were racks or where it would hold the quilts. But also within that, I have a cotton sheet, actually a double cotton sheet, like a duvet cover, to lay inside of it before I put the quilts in, because you don't want your quilts up against the wood because of the acid.
And that's true even with cedar chests or anything else. The acid in the wood or any of that can really cause damage and fading in a certain way, or staining. So it's a good idea to have something else, between the quilt. And sometimes people use archival paper. Sometimes they use, old sheets. That what Paula had was really good. It was very heavy flannel. And it helps you lift it out too. So.
And what about cleaning these?
Somebody who's sort of famous in the quilt world once said there was a question on the Antique Quilt Guild website, and it said, what do I do about quilting when I feel like my quilts need to be washed? and this woman who's sort of a wit said, have a drink and lay down and then get over it and then just don't do it, basically. Wait until, rethink it, and then you'll decide you won't want to do it. Because some quilts are very fragile, and it's touch and go, whether it's going to cause more damage. We've all seen, I think, red and green quilts that the red has turned to almost or the green has turned to almost a saddle color. And so it's terrible to have something wonderful and then you try to wash it and it comes up terrible. But sometimes you don't have a choice. It's always a good idea, I think, to vacuum something before you're going to wash it. And I always put a sheet in the bottom of the bathtub, and then I use OxyClean or some other thing like that. And the reason I put the sheet in is because I don't want to be holding the wet quilt up and having this be wet and heavy. So if I'm cradling it in a sheet, the sheet takes the stress and not the quilted item. And I usually use OxyClean or sometimes Orvis soap paste. And sometimes you end up washing it 3 or 4 or 5 times. It just depends on, one of the problems is a lot of times there was nicotine, and that really, and it smells terrible. Dan thought I killed somebody and was washing it out in the bathtub because it was like, sweet, what does that stink? It's like, oh, nicotine of 50 years. And then you rinse it, and then you can use the sheet to roll it up and try to squeeze some of the fabric, the water out of the fabric. One of the things you kind of have to watch out for is when you hang it and let the water drip, you get, I don't know what the real name for it is, sort of like tide marks where the water has gone up, and that's like the highest line from where everything, so you kind of have to watch out for that stuff. Now, I will say, having said all of that, I have sometimes washed them in a front-loading washing machine, but I really have to know what it is, that it's not precious to me, that it smells so bad that I can't have it in the house another way, and cope with those things.
Mm-hmm. So, it seems like OxyClean would be a really harsh detergent, but if you have stains that just you can't live with, then I could see using that. But if you had a quilt that just needed a light, you felt it was too dirty, to leave it as is, because dirt does attract silverfish.
And it's not just dirt, it's DNA based dirt, let's just say that and be polite about it. So that
human
oils and all that kind of stuff. And it's the same in your socks too. If you don't wash your socks out and you find a pair of socks under the bed, which I did at a friend's house one time, and it was a problem. It can be a problem. But anyway, so that the OxyClean is harsh, but it's really good for certain things that you really can't get out any other way.
Okay.
I do that same thing for crocheted bedspreads or tablecloths, because it's amazing, things that you think are ecru or darker really turn out beautifully white once they're cleaned.
But you wouldn't use bleach or anything. Bleach is way too harsh for that.
I think that's right. Yeah,
I've heard lemon juice. Is that?
Well, I think lemon juice is okay for stains and things, to try to bleach things out. And you put it in the sun, but I don't really have a heavy enough clothesline where you could do that and it would be useful.
Then you have the weight of the quilt again.
Yeah, and then and then the birds get on it, and so it's just whatever.
Okay.
So it can be done.
Any other quilt tips? Mainly trying to identify, if you have a family quilt and you have older family members, try to identify, get as much information you can about the quilts and write it down. And like Joe said, you could, if you're doing it yourself, just get a piece of muslin, write it down with a Pigma marker, and what you know about it and the person that made it and the approximate date. And if you have questions, you can leave them below on the YouTube channel. You can ask questions, and Joe can help answer those, because they probably won't be anything I can answer, because I don't know anything about antique quilts really much, beyond that they're gorgeous and I love them. So, yeah. Well, thank you so much.
I've enjoyed
had a
it very
great
much.
time, and we've learned a lot, I think. So you can find Joe on Ravelry. She's quilting knit nut. It's QWILT.
KNITNUT.
Yes.
Quilt did that. Yeah.
And we'll put that link below, or she's also the same on Instagram. So you can follow her on Instagram as well. And as I said before, I am Prairie Piper on Ravelry, and I'm Knitting Pipeline on Instagram. So I hope that you follow us both on Instagram. And also, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, as you know, some of you already know, there's knitting, quilting, and whatever wool applique, whatever fiber arts I'm into or my sister's into. And my sister is coming and she'll be doing a video with me too. So we'll have 2 fairly close videos coming up. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something as I did. And yeah, that's it,
Thanks.
right? Goodbye.
Bye.